Before you get IUL, you have to know how to read your policy illustrations and identify these 5 key metrics to make sure it's structured to achieve the goal that you are trying to accomplish. I'll have another video where I really dive into all the pages of the illustration and really break down how to read them from top to bottom. This one is just the key ones, rather right when you get it. Let's double check, where ideally you should be doing this before you actually even get an IUL. You should be looking at your policy digitally and really identifying these key things. Let's take a look. The very most important thing is policy structure. Again, it seems so simple, but it's so important. Simply getting this wrong can completely eliminate all of the good things you've heard about IUL and make it a disaster. In this example, we're looking at a mock scenario for a 60-year-old moving over $500,000 in 5 years and then the first day of the 6th policy year. In this example, we are using Nationwide software. I like this specific product with them for many reasons. That's for another time. There's plenty of companies out there that have good ones. Just so we can see an actual illustration though and what a mock one would look like, this is what we are using. Again, the policy illustrations are very long. You can see here on the left, there's the why Nationwide, understanding the benefits, how it works, all sorts of things in there. We're just gonna be looking at the 5 key things. Those 5 key things are first, the year 1 accumulation and surrender value. So you can see we're in the tabular detail on the non-guaranteed page, and then you can see for each section, they have an accumulated value and a net surrender value. So that's what we're gonna look at in year 1. You can see in this case, he's putting in $92,080 in the first year. The accumulated value is $80,716. And the net surrender value is that $45,515. Now this is just a small thing to check. This is good. The exact numbers are gonna differ here for everyone, depending on age, health, gender, how much you put in, all of that. Even the percentages are gonna differ. But the main thing here is making sure we see that that net surrender value isn't 0 in year 1. There are some super rare cases where that could be okay, but for the majority of them, if your surrender value is 0 in year 1, that is an error. We really want to make sure that it's usually going to be around 50% of what we put in. Sometimes it's much more, sometimes it's a little bit less, but the surrender value should be that, and then the accumulation value shouldn't be too much less than the actual money we put in. The fees are always going to be higher in the early years, so in this case, it's a little more than 10% less than what we put in. As long as it's around there, it doesn't mean that it's like 100% good, but it does mean it's not a disaster. So that's the first thing to check. Second is going to be our GSP. It's our Guideline Single Premium. Now, you can see here, I mentioned that he is putting in $500,000 over the course of 6 years, or 5 years in the first policy day of the 6th year. And you can see right here, where I'm highlighting, the total he puts in is $500,000. That means our Guideline Single Premium needs to be $500,000. So if we go to our premium summary, and then we scroll down, we can see it's often titled the GSP. Our GSP here, you can see $500,000.37. That's good. That means the total amount we're putting in is equal to the Guideline Single Premium. There is some cases where you're putting in just like on an annual basis, where you might use the Guideline Annual Premium, for example. But in most cases where you're just moving money over, for example, the $500,000, you want to make sure it's equal to the Guideline Single Premium. If you're doing that, there's another thing that is the MEC premium, the Modified Endowment Premium, the 7-Pay Premium, the TAMRA Premium. It has a bunch of different names for different companies, but that's what this one is, the MEP. You can see this says $92,079.79. What this means is even though we're putting in $500,000 total, this is the most we can put in 1 year to get to that. So if we go back to our non-guaranteed tab, we see here, that's exactly how much we're putting in. And we're not actually putting in the 21 cents more. You can see if you scroll up right there, the $92,079.79 is actually what we're putting in. So that's good. That means we're not putting in too much to where we're triggering a taxable event. Now, I said that's the most you can put in a year. That's technically not 100% accurate. Let's say right here, you put this in the first year, right? The $92,080. The second year, you couldn't put in anything. You put in 0. Well, the third year, you actually have that room. You can make that up. So if you had $92,080 times 2, whatever that is, if you wanted, you could put all of that in the third policy year since you didn't use the room from year 2. So a little note there in case you were catching up, so that's good to know. Now these are the two most important. That is the annual cost summary. So we're gonna look at that first, and then we're gonna look at the internal rate of return. There's a lot of nuances within that. First, the annual cost summary. Your agent should be running these with your reports. Usually the agent will have to turn these on. They're not in every illustration, but make sure that they're running these and that you get a look at them. So here is an example of an annual cost summary. You'll be able to see all of the fees involved with whether it's going towards the per 1,000, the commissions, any rider charges you might have. All of it is in here. So this is, you need to know this, especially because let's say you're moving over the 500,000, you're gonna lose money in the first year. You're gonna lose money in the second year. Technically, if the market did really well in an index that allowed for you to do that, you might not. But in general, you're going to lose money early on. They're long-term vehicles. One example that one of my trainers likes to use is it's like you have a building. Let's say you have a 5-story building and you just bought that building, but it takes you 5 years until you have people renting on all 5 floors. But you're not gonna be super profitable until that building is filled up. And if you only fill 1 floor a year, those beginning years, you're still in the acquisition phase of actually getting customers for all 5 floors. Once it's all full, then you're really gonna start to see gains in returns. So in this example, your per 1,000 base is very heavy in the first 10 years. Right after that, you can see that cost goes away. 0 for the rest of the policy. You can also see your base cost of insurance charges. You can see how that actually starts to get smaller once you drop your death benefit later on in the policy. You can scroll down and see that after age 95, your cost of insurance actually goes to 0. We don't need to get too into the nuances here, but the main thing that you need to know is take a look at your policy expenses, know what to expect when it does get 1, 2, 3 years into your policy, so you don't pull up your little portal and think, well, geez, that's weird. Why is my amount not this much? I thought I was gaining, say, 6, 7% on average. You need to understand your fees. Last but not least is usually right after that we can see is the internal rate of return. In this specific example, it shows us the IRR on the contract value, otherwise the accumulated value, surrender value, and the death benefit. What I always like to do, so in this case, you can see up here in the upper right, that it's supposed to, this is running an illustration, if it gained 6.3% hypothetically per year. So what you can do on the surrender value, for example, is you can scroll down to, I usually like to go to like year 30, for example. The 60-year-old that puts the 500,000 in 5 years and starts taking income right away, you can see, okay, so he had 6.3% is what he was assuming in the interest. Well, we want to know what was his actual net internal rate of return. So in this case, if he only gained the 6.3, his net internal rate of return up until age 90 was 4.81%. So that would be like essentially a 1.5% fee every year. So just like a financial advisor takes a 1.5% fee, of course there's taxes and everything else that comes with that, but in this case you would only get the 1.5% fee. Now, the 4.81% does not look beautiful. Of course, that's because they can only run the illustrations up to a certain limit. In this case, the rate of return is going to be lower given that we started taking the income right away. But even if you did continue it out, for example, just scrolling all the way down through age 120, you can get all the way up to a point where, in this case, hey, the internal rate of return was 5.65. That's only a 0.65% fee on average throughout the life of the policy. Again, and that's only assuming that the policy gained 6.3%, which is huge. People talk so much about the fees and all of the, oh, IUL is so expensive, insurance gets more expensive as you get older. It's really not true. If you actually have it structured properly and you stick with them until the end, the internal rate of return report is a great way to actually see what your net fees are. This one can be confusing for people, I understand, but the main thing, make sure they're running your internal rate of return reports. Just take a look at it, compare it to the number they're illustrating, maybe 30, 40 years in, however long you kind of expect to at least be using this, and take a look, get familiar with it, and understand this is the net rate of return I can expect rather than just the rate they're illustrating at. And if your policy isn't structured properly, this is really going to be an area where it's going to show. If your net internal rate of return is 1%, 2%, even less, you can make the easy observation that it's probably not structured the way that you want it to be. Those are the 5 things that I personally would look at when looking at a policy illustration before I even got an IUL. If you already do have one, pull out your policy packets, go into your policy portal, look at these, make sure it's structured correctly. But again, ideally you do these beforehand. These are just the simple things that you can quickly check and see, okay, my policy is probably structured correctly, or unfortunately, in many cases, not structured correctly. As I mentioned, I will have a future video on how to read policy illustrations from start to finish in much more detail. If you found any of this helpful or would like to see a policy illustration more tailored to you, feel free to comment the situation below and subscribe. I will definitely make a video on it. I will see you in the future videos. Bye-bye.